Alright, greetings and salutations. My name is Comic Fire, and welcome back for more of the dramatic reading of the Edge Chronicles Beyond the Deepwoods. This episode will be reading the penultimate chapter, Chapter 12, The Sky Pirates. Let's begin. Far above Twig's head, the clouds thinned. They swirled and squirmed around the moon like a bucket full of maggots. Twig stared upwards, spellbound, horrified. So much skybound activity, while down on the forest floor it was all so still. Not a leaf stirred. The heavy air felt charged. All at once a flash of blue-white light splashed across the far reaches of the sky. Twig counted. When he got to 11, a booming roll of thunder rumbled. Again the sky lit up, brighter than before. Again the thunder sounded. This time Twig only counted to 8. The storm was getting closer. He began to run. Slipping, stumbling, sometimes falling, he hurried across the treacherous forest floor. Now bright as day, now black as pitch. The wind had got up, dry, electric. It tousled his hair and set the fleece of his hamelhorn skin waistcoat bristling. With his eyes full of the pinky afterdazzle of each lightning bolt, the darkness that followed was all the darker. Twig staggered on blindly. The wind gusted at his back. There was a crackle in the sky directly above his head, and a jagged fork of absolute brilliance tore the sky apart. The thunder struck at once with a The air trembled. The earth shook. Twig fell to the ground and wrapped his arms around his head. It's falling, he stammered. The open sky is falling. A second eye-blinding, air-splitting mix of thunder and lightning battered the forest. Then a third, and a fourth. Yet all the time, that space between the two was growing. Twig climbed shakily to his feet. The forest, one moment brightly lit like a tribe of dancing skeletons. The next plunged into the darkness, was still around him, the sky still above. He climbed one of the trees, a tall and ancient luftwood, to watch the storm receding. Up and up he went. The swirling wind plucked at his hands and feet. At the top he rested in a swaying fork, panting for breath. The air smelled of rain, but no rain fell. The lightning stabbed, the sky glowed, the thunder rumbled. Abruptly the wind dropped. Twig wiped his eyes and with his fingers combed away the last remaining beads and bows. He watched them bounce and flutter out of sight before him. He looked up, and there, just for a second, silhouetted against the lightning sky, Twig's heart missed a beat. "A sky ship," he whispered. The lightning faded. The ship disappeared. Another flash and the sky lit up again. "But now it's facing the other way," Twig said. More lightning and the sky grew brighter still. "It's spinning," he gasped. "It's caught in a whirlwind." Round and round the sky ship went, faster and faster, so fast that even Twig felt dizzy. The mainsail flapped wildly. The rigging lashed the air. Powerless, out of control, the sky ship was being dragged towards the swirling vortex at the center of the storm. Suddenly a single solitary finger of lightning zigzagged down out of the cloud. It hurtled towards the spinning sky ship, and struck. The ship rolled to one side. Something small and round and twinkling like a star fell away from the side, and tumbled down towards the forest below. The sky ship spiraled down after it. Twig gasped. The sky ship was dropping out of the sky like a stone. It went dark again. Twig chewed his hair, his scarf, his nails. It remained dark. "One more flash," Twig pleaded, "just so I can see what's—" And the flash came, illuminating a long stretch across the distant horizon. In the dim light, Twig saw 3 bat-like creatures hovering above the falling ship. And as he watched, 2, 3 more joined them, each one leaping from the decks and fluttering away on the ebbing wind. And here's what a ship looks like, of the sky variety. The sky pirates were abandoning ship. An 8th figure leapt to safety just a second before the sky ship crashed down into the forest canopy. Twig flinched. Had the whole crew managed to escape in time? Had the skyship been smashed to bits? Had the flying figures he'd seen landed safely? He fairly flew back down the tree and raced off through the woods as fast as his legs would carry him. The moon was shining bright and clear, and the night animals were all in full voice. The trees, shot with their own shadows, looked as though they'd been draped in long nets. Apart from the occasional falling branch and whiff of smoldering greenwood, there was no sign that the storm had passed that way. Twig ran till he could run no more. He stood doubled over, a stitch in his side, and gulped for breath. Moonbirds twittered loudly from their perches above his head. Then Twig heard another noise, a hissing, a spitting. He walked forwards. It seemed to be coming from a comb bush just up ahead. He pushed the branches aside and was immediately struck by a blast of intense heat. Lying half buried in the ground was a rock. It was enormous and round and glowed white hot. The grass around it had shriveled, the overhanging bush was charred. Twig squinted at the rock, sheltering his eyes from the heat and dazzle. Could this be the star he'd seen falling from the skyship? He looked round. The ship and its crew couldn't be far away. The moonbirds were squawking irritably over something or another. Twig clapped his hands and they flew off. Out of the silence that followed, Twig heard the low murmur of voices. He crept forwards. The voices grew louder. He caught sight of a tall, heavy-set, red-faced man with a thick, knotted beard and ducked down behind a fallen branch. It was a sky pirate. And there he is. "Oh, we'd best find the others," he was saying. His voice deep and chewy. He chuckled. "The look on Slivo's face when he jumped. White as codfish he was and green at the gills." "He was up to something," a reedy voice replied matter-of-factly. "Up to no good." Twig stretched up to see who was speaking. "You're not wrong there, Spiker," said the bearded pirate gruffly. "He's not been happy since that business with the ironwood. That electric storm was a blessing in disguise, and my name's not Tem Barkwater." He paused. "I just hope the captain's all right." "Sky willing," came the reply. Twig stretched up again, but could still only see the one pirate. He stepped up onto the branch for a better look, and crack! The wood gave under his feet. "What was that?" bellowed Tem Barkwater. He spun around and scoured the silvery shadows. "Probably just an animal," the second sky pirate said. "I'm not so sure," said Tem Barkwater slowly. Twig cowered down. The whispering sound of tiptoe footsteps approached. Twig looked up. He found himself staring into the delicate yet broad face of someone little older than himself. An oak elf by the look of him. It must be Spiker. The oak elf stared at Twig, a puzzled frown playing over his features. Finally, "Do I know you?" he said. "You find anything?" Tem Barkwater called. Spiker continued to stare, his tufted ears twitch. "Yes," he said quietly. And here's Spiker. "What's that?" "I said yes," he shouted back and seized Twig by the shoulder. The Hamelhorn skin fleece turned at once to needles and stabbed the oak elf's hand. He yelped, pulled away, and sucked his fingers tenderly, all the while staring suspiciously at Twig. "Follow me," he instructed. "Oh, what have we here, then?" said Tem Barkwater as Spiker and Twig emerged before them. "Lanky little so-and-so, ain't he?" said and squeezed Twig's upper arm with a bulging finger and thumb. "Who are you, lad?" "Twig, sir," said Twig. "Extra hands on board, eh?" he said and winked at Spiker. Twig felt a thrill of excitement shudder through his body. "If there's still an on board left," the oak elf commented. "Course there is," said Tem Barkwater. He laughed throatily. "Just a matter of finding out where it's got to." Twig cleared his throat. I think it's over there," pointing to his right. Tem Barkwater turned and stooped and pressed his large hairy faces into Twig. "And how would you know that?" I saw it crash," he said uncertainly. "You saw it?" he bellowed. "I was up in a tree watching the storm. I saw the sky ship get trapped in the whirlwind." "You saw it," Tem Barkwater repeated more softly than before. He clapped his hands together. "Then you better lead us there, Twig, me old mucker." It was a mixture of luck and guesswork that got him there, but get there he did. They hadn't gone more than 100 steps before Tem Barkwater spied the hole ahead of them, glinting in the moonlight high above the branches. "There she is," he murmured. "The Storm Chaser herself." "Well done, lad," he said to Twig and slapped him heartily on the shoulder. "Shh," hissed Spiker. "We're not the first ones back." Tem cocked his hide to one side. "It's that rogue of a quartermaster, Slivo Spleeth," he muttered. Spiker raised a finger to his lips, and the three of them stood stock still, straining to hear the muttered conversation. "It would seem, my dear Mugbutt, that our captain has overreached himself," Slivo was saying. His voice was nasal and precise, with every D and T being spat out like something distasteful. "Overreached himself?" came a low, gruff echo. Tem Barkwater shifted about restlessly. His face grew thunderously dark. He craned his neck. "The stone pilot's with him, too," he whispered. Twig stole a glance at the gap in the leaves. There were 3 pilots there. Mugbutt was a flathead goblin. With his broad, flat skull and wide ears, he was typical of his kind, yet fiercer by far than the flathead who had helped Twig out of the swamp. Behind him stood a squat creature dressed in a heavy overcoat and heavier boots. Here's a picture of these 3. His head was hidden behind a large pointed hood which extended down over his chest. 2 round glass panels allowed him to see out. He did not speak. The 3rd pirate was Slivo Spleeth himself, a tall yet stooped figure, all angles and points. His nose was long, his chin sharp, and behind his steel-rimmed spectacles were shifty eyes constantly on the move. "I mean, far be it from me to say I told you so," he continued. "But, well, if we had left the ironwood, as I suggested—" "The price of the stuff is plummeting anyway at the moment." There was a pause and a sigh. "If we had left it, we wouldn't have been anywhere near the storm." "Near the storm," growled Mugbutt. "Still, who am I to argue with fate? If the command of the ship was destined to fall upon my shoulders, I must accept my responsibility with—" He searched for the right word. Mugbutt filled the silence. "Responsibility with—" "Oh, do stop interrupting me," Slivo snapped. "You are brave in battle, Mugbutt, don't get me wrong, a credit to your tribe. But you lack any sort of occasion." "Occasion," Mugbutt repeated. Slivo grunted impatiently. "Come," he said, "let us break the glad tidings to the others." Tem could remain still no longer. "Treacherous dog," he growled as he burst through the undergrowth and into the clearing. The stone pilot, Mugbutt, and Slivo Spleeth all spun round. "My dear Tem," said Slivo, his disappointment turning instantly to a tight-lipped smile. "And Spiker, you 2 made it too." Twig held back, watching, listening. "He ought to be chained up," said Tem, pointing at the flathead goblin. "Captain's orders." Slivo lowered his head coyly and fiddled with one of the knots in his mustache. "The thing is," he whispered, looking up over his glasses, "as I was just saying to Mugbutt here, our illustrious Captain Quintinius Virginix is—" He looked round theatrically. "Not here," he smirked. "And Mugbutt does so enjoy his freedom." Tem grunted. For the time being, at least, there was nothing he could do. "What state is the ship in?" he asked. Slivo looked up. "How's it going, Stope?" he called. "Okay," came a voice which squeaked as it spoke. "Superficial damage mainly. The rudder's taken a hammering, but nothing I can't fix." Will she soon be sky-worthy? Said Slivo impatiently. A head poked out from the overhead foliage. A hard bullet head it was, with a close-fitting metal frame over the skull which held a bolted jaw in place. She won't be sky-worthy till they get the flight rock back in place. And there is Stope. Slivo grimaced and stamped his foot sulkily. Can't you improvise? Luftwood, blood oak, they rise, just burn more! Stope Boltjaw tutted and shook his head. Can't do it, he said. You could never contain a fire the size it would take to achieve the active lift. Besides... There must be something you can do, Slivo screamed. I still don't understand where the blasted rock fell in the first place. Because it was struck by lightning, said Stope Boltjaw. I know that, you idiot, snapped Slivo, but... Cold rock rises, hot rock sinks, Stope continued patiently. Scientific fact. And I'll tell you another scientific fact. What heats up cools down. If you lot don't find that flight rock before much longer, it'll have floated off forever. And now, if you'll excuse me, I've got cradle moorings to report, just in case you should find it. His head disappeared behind the leafy branches. Slivo bit into his lips. The blood drained from his face. You've heard him, he said. Find the flight rock! Spiker and Mugbutt turned and hurried off. The stone pilot plodded after them. Tem Barkwater held his ground. Well? Slivo demanded. I might be able to tell you where the rock is, on one condition. When it's back in place, we wait for the captain. Oh, but of course, said Slivo. I give you my word. He reached out and shook Tem by the hand. From his place in the undergrowth, Twig saw the quartermaster's other arm swing round behind his back. The hand was missing 2 fingers, and the raw scars looked recent. The 2 remaining fingers were stiffly crossed. Tem nodded. I aim to ensure that you keep your word, he said. He turned away. Twig, he called out. Are you there, lad? Come out where I can see ya. Twig stood up and stepped forwards. A spy, hissed Slivo. A witness, said Tem, to what you promised. He turned to Twig. Do you know where the flight rock landed, he asked. Twig hesitated. He glanced up at Slivo Spleeth. It's all right, Tem assured him. Twig nodded. I know all right, he admitted. I saw it. Like a shooting star. It looked... well, a dropping star. A falling star. Get on with it, said Slivo sharply. Twig blushed. He was talking too much. But he couldn't help it. The whiff of adventure about the rough and rugged sky pirates quickened his heart and loosened his tongue. He turned away from Slivo's intense gaze and started walking. It's this way, he said. Hey, you lot, Slivo Spleeth called out to Spiker, Mugbutt, and the stone pilot. Follow us. Twig led the ragtag rabble of pirates back through the forest. This way looked familiar in the swaying lamplight. He first heard, then saw the humming comb bush. He marched up to it and parted the branches. The stone was still there, embedded in the ground. It glowed a deep, buttery yellow. And there it is. It was white before, said Twig. It's cooling down, said Tem. The trick will be to get it back in the sky ship while it's light enough to carry, but not heavy enough not to fly away. Slivo turned to the stone pilot. You are responsible for transporting it, he said. From deep within the stone pilot's pointed hood came a grunt of acknowledgement. He lumbered forwards, crouched down, and embraced the rock in his broad arms. The sleeves in front of his fireproof coat hissed. Twig sniffed. The air smelt of scorched mud. The stone pilot heaved and strained, and the glass panels at the front of one of his hoods misted over. Stone pilot heaved and strained, and the glass panels at the front of his hood misted over, but the flight rock did not budge. Empty your water flasks onto it, said Tem. Yes, Slivo said, remembering his new responsibilities. Empty your water flasks onto it. He and the others began pouring water onto the glowing stone. Where it landed, the water hissed and turned the rock a shade of orange. More, Slivo commanded. The sky pirates trotted off, returning soon after with their flasks refilled. Little by little, the rock turned a rich, deep red. It began to wobble in its earthy setting. The stone pilot tried again. This time the rock came out of the ground with a soft squap. And there's that happening. Staggering under the weight and wheezing, the stone pilot trudged back to the clearing. The others tramped after him. Because of the intense heat radiating from the rock, there was nothing they could do to help. Nothing but hope and pray. The hull of the skyship came into view. "We've got it, Stope," Tem called ahead. "We've got the flight rock." "I'll be directly ready," Stope Boltjaw shouted back, and Twig again noticed the squeaking sound as he spoke. "I'm just making sure the grappling hooks and anchor are secure," he said. "Wouldn't want to leave him without us." The stone pilot grumbled. The cooling rock was threatening to slip out of his grasp at any moment. "Have you rigged up the cradle?" Slivo called up. "What do you take me for?" came the irritated reply. "Of course I have. I used some of the ironwood. It's less buoyant than Lovewood or Blood Oak, but more fire resistant, in case the rock's too hot." The stone pilot grunted urgently. "It's rising!" Spiker yelled. Stope Boltjaw's head appeared out of the tree. "Can you climb with it?" he asked. The stone pilot shook his head and groaned. It was all he could do to keep the increasingly buoyant rock in his grasp. "In that case," Stope called down, "we'll go for Plan B, but it'll need pinpoint accuracy if it's going to work. The stone pilot will have to get the rock directly beneath the cradle for releasing it. So, left a couple paces." The stone pilot shuffled awkwardly to the left. "Stop." "Forwards a tad. Stop." "Back a bit. Left. Back a bit more." Stope paused. "That should do it," he whispered. "When I say now, let the rock go, but be careful not to nudge it when you do." Twig peered up into the tree. He saw Stope Boltjaw open the door of the cage-like contraption attached to the center of the hull. He held it open with his foot and raised a long harpoon ready. "Now!" he called. The stone pilot gently released his load. For a moment the rock hovered in the air. It rotated. Then it began to rise, slowly at first, but gathering speed. Twig saw Stope Boltjaw bracing himself against a branch. The rock came closer. It was going to miss the cradle! Stope leaned forwards and gently prodded the rock with his harpoon. It shifted slightly to the left and continued rising. Come on, Slivo urged the flying rock. He turned to Mugbutt. "If he does it, I want everyone on board at once," he hissed. Twig listened closely. "And if Tem Barkwater objects," he went on, "deal with him, Mugbutt, okay?" Kerdonk! The stone landed in the cradle. Slam! Click! Stope Boltjaw kicked the door shut with his foot. He bent down and secured the catch. "Done it!" he roared triumphantly. Twig's heart fluttered. The wonderful pirate ship was skyworthy once more, and he whooped and cheered with the rest. "This shall not go unremembered, Stope Boltjaw," Slivo announced. "Well done." "Yes," came a second voice, deep and sonorous. "Well done." Everyone spun round. "Captain," Tem Barkwater grinned, "you made it." "Indeed I did, Tem," came the solemn reply. Twig gazed at the captain. He looked magnificent. He was tall, and unlike the stooping Slivo Spleeth, stood upright, proud and elegant. His side whiskers were waxed. Here's a picture before I have to flip the page. And a black leather patch stretched across one eye. From his long pirate's coat hung a multitude of objects, from goggles and a telescope to grappling irons and daggers. By his side was a long curved cutlass which glinted in the silver moonlight. Twig started. Hadn't he seen such a cutlass before, with its jeweled handle and a nick in the blade? Just then an eighth figure emerged from the undergrowth. Twig stared. It was a Banderbear, though quite different from his old friend, for this one was white with red eyes, an albino. It pulled the dead body of a Hamelhorn from its shoulder and let it fall to the ground, then took its place behind the captain. "Ah, Hubble," the captain said. "That's who I wanted to see. Take the flathead and chain him up." The Banderbear pointed to the skyship. "Oh?" it said. No, said the captain, to a tree, but a strong one, mind. Mugbutt snarled and raised a fist in defiance. The Banderbear swatted it away and seized the chain around the goblin's neck, almost lifting him off his feet. Easy, Hubble, ordered the captain. The Banderbear lowered its arm and jerked the chain. Mugbutt was led away. Do you think that is altogether wise, sire? Came the whining voice of Slivo Spleef. Here we are in the deep woods. Anything might be out there. Mugbutt could be useful in case of a surprise attack. The captain turned and fixed Slivo with his good eye. Do you think I cannot read your mutinous heart, Spleef? He said. Your friends in the Undertown League of Free Merchants are of no use to you out in the deep woods. We are an independent crew, and I give the orders. One more word, and I'll have you sky-fired till I make myself clear. What's sky-fired? Twig whispered to Spiker. Tied to a branch of burning blood oak, the oak elf whispered back. You go up like a rocket, screaming all the way. Twig shuddered. We'll stay here the night and depart at first light, the captain was saying. He turned to Tem. Right then, ship's cook, he said, kicking at the dead Hamelhorn. Get cooking! Aye, aye, captain, said Tem keenly. Spiker, plot us a route back to Undertown. I don't want to be stuck in these accursed woods any longer than necessary. He looked up. How much longer will you need to effect repairs, Boltjaw? Couple hours, captain, came the reply. I've just got to chamfer the new bidgets and realign the rudder pins. And the stone pilot? He's down in the engine room, reboring the flange ducts. Excellent work, said the captain. He turned and looked down at Twig. And it was at that moment that Twig knew for sure that he'd met the captain before. It was the eye patch which stopped him from recognizing him all at once. He was the one Tuntum had met all the time ago in the forest when his wood troll father had been trying to set him up with a job. The tall, elegant sky pirate with his jeweled sword, with a nick in the blade. How could he have forgotten? Why are you just standing there gawping, the captain barked. Help the others with the fire. Twig set to work at once. He dashed into the forest to collect kindling. When he returned, however, the fire was already ablaze, roaring and crackling. With every log that Spiker and Tem Barkwater tossed onto the fire, a mighty shower of orange sparks filled the air. The fire sang and groaned and hissed with the different woods. Occasionally a piece of blazing luftwood floated up from the flames and soared off into the sky like an emergency flare. Twig shuddered. Growing up with the wood trolls, he'd been taught to respect fire, the most treacherous necessity of all to a forest dweller. That's why they burnt buoyant wood in stoves. The sky pirate's carelessness appalled him. He was busy kicking burning branches back into the main blaze when Hubble returned from chaining Mugbutt securely to the tree. It was looking for the captain, yet as it passed Twig it paused. Oh! It bellowed, and pointed at the tooth around Twig's neck. I wouldn't go too near Hubble if I were you, Tem Barkwater called. It's an unpredictable beast at the best of times. But Twig took no notice. Despite the white Banderbear's ferocious appearance, there was a familiar sadness in its eyes. It stretched out a claw and gently touched the tooth. Twig! It growled. Twig stared back in amazement. Hubble knew who he was. He remembered the times his old friend had yodeled to the moonlit sky. He remembered the yodeled replies. Could it have been Hubble's desolate cry that Twig had heard the night the Banderbear had died? Hubble touched its chest, then pointed to Twig. Friends, it said. Twig smiled. Friends, he said. At that moment there came the sound of the captain's angry voice. He wanted Hubble, and he wanted him now. Hubble swung around and plodded off obediently. Twig looked up to see Tem Barkwater staring at him in disbelief. I swear I have never seen the like in all my born days, he said. Friends with a Banderbear, whatever next? He shook his head. Come on, young'un, he said, help me over here. Here's that going down. Tem was standing by the fire. Having expertly skinned the Hamelhorn, he'd skewered it on a length of ironwood and placed it above the flames. The air was now thick with the smell of roasting meat. Twig joined him, and the pair of them turned the spit round and round, round and round. By that time, Stoke Boltjaw announced that he'd finished his repairs and came down from the tree. The Hamelhorn was cooked. Tem banged a gong. "Grub's up," he called. Twig sat down between Tem Barkwater and Spiker. The captain and Hubble were opposite of them, with Slivo Spleeth sitting back a little in the shadows. The stone pilot hadn't appeared, and Mugbutt the flathead goblin, still chained to a tree, had to make do with the scraps he was thrown. As the sky pirates filled their empty stomachs with black bread and steaming chunks of hamelhorn meat, washed down with mugfuls of wood ale, their spirits lifted. "Of course," laughed Tem Barkwater. "We've been in worse scrapes than this, ain't we, Captain?" The captain grunted. He didn't seem to feel like talking. "Why, that time we raided the League ships over Sanctifrax itself. Never thought we'd get away with it. Cornered we were, nowhere to run, in a boarding party of wild flathead goblins with murder on their minds popping out of the cargo holds of those big fat League ships. Never seen Spleeth shake so much, nor run so fast neither. Kept saying, 'There should have been liver birch in these holds.' And so there should," muttered Slivo. "Would have made us all a packet, too." "But the captain wasn't running. Oh no, not him, not Cloud Wolf," Tem chuckled. "He just pulled out that great sword of his and set about the lot of 'em, Hubble following on behind. It was murder, all right, but not the kind those goblins had in mind. That's where we got Mugbutt. Only one left standing. Mighty good fighter, but needs watching. It's also where the captain lost his eye. Fair exchange, he calls it." "Enough, Tem," sighed the captain. "It weren't no fair exchange when I lost my jaw," broke in Stoke Boltjaw's ironwood replacement, squeaking as he spoke. "Had my back turned to attending to the grappling socket. Ulbus Pentafraxus creeps up behind me with a hunting axe. I never stood a chance." He spat into the fire. "He's now a League captain, living life in the Lotarian Undertown. Leaguesman." He hawked and spit again. "Oh, they're not so bad," wheedled Slivo Spleeth, shifting closer to the fire. "Now when I was starting out in Undertown as—" "Spiker," the captain interrupted. "Have you plotted that course?" The Oak Elf nodded. "Good lad," he said, and looked slowly around the circle of pirates, suddenly somber. "The 3 rules of sky sailing. Never set sail before you plotted your course. Never fly higher than your longest grappling rope. And on no account dock in uncharted areas." The pirates nodded earnestly. Each and every one of them knew the perils of getting lost in the vast green leafy ocean. The fire was low. Twig watched the flickering flames reflected in the captain's thoughtful eye. "I did that once," he went on. "Landed where I should not have landed." He sighed. "But then again, I had no choice." The pirates looked at one another in surprise. It was unlike the captain to speak of himself. They topped up their mugs and drew closer, and the darkness wrapped itself around them. "A wet and stormy night it was," Captain Quintinius Virginix, Cloud Wolf, began. Twig's body tingled with excitement. "A cold night," he said. "A night of expectation and of sorrow. And there's Quintinius Virginix, Cloud Wolf." Twig hung on his every word. "At the time, I was a crew member on board a League ship." He looked round at the circle of faces bathed in the dying fire glow. Mouths open, eyes wide, and smiled. "You load of ruffians," he chuckled. "If you think I'm a hard taskmaster, you should have served under Maltinius Gobtrax. Ruthless, demanding, punctilious, the worst sort of League captain you'll ever meet." Twig watched the fireflies playing roly-poly in the air and darting in and out of the leaves. The wind had dropped completely and his hair and skin felt damp. He chewed on the corner of its scarf. "Picture it," the captain said, and Twig closed his eyes. "There were but 5 of us on board the ship, and only 4 who were in any state of sailor. Goptrax and his bodyguard, the stone pilot, and me. Maris was already 9 months with child. The storm had caught us unawares and dragged us way off course. Worse than that, the upcurrents were terrible strong. Before we could weigh anchor or secure the grappling irons, we'd been sucked up far above the forest and towards open sky." Twig's head spun round. Strain from the path was bad enough, but being lost in open sky. "We lowered the sails, but still we continued to rise. I crouched down next to Maris. 'Everything's going to be all right,' I said, though I scarce believed it myself. We would never get back to Undertown before she went into labor, and even if we did, the birth of the child was little cause for celebration. Twig opened his eyes and looked at the captain. He was staring into the glowing embers of the fire, playing idly with the waxed points of his side whiskers. His single eyes shone moistly. "Was there something wrong with it?" asked Twig. The captain stood. "No," he said, "only the fact that it was a child at all." He paused, and his eye glazed over. "Maris and I had big decisions to make," he said. "I was ambitious. I intended one day to command my own skyship. I couldn't be doing that with a child weighing me down. A captain or a father, that was the choice I had to make. It was no choice at all. I told Maris that we could travel together, but she would have to choose between the baby and me. And she chose me." He breathed deeply in and out. "Mother Horsefeather agreed to take the child off of our hands." Complete silence fell around the campfire. The pirates looked down at the ground awkwardly. They felt uneasy listening to their cloud wolf opening up in this way. Tem Barkwater busied himself with stoking up the fire. The captain sighed. "At least that was the plan. There we were, miles from Undertown, and being drawn ever upwards." He nodded up towards the skyship. "It was the stone pilot who saved us then, as he saved us this evening. He doused the buoyant wood burners, released the balance weights, and when that was not enough, he climbed over the side and began chipping away at the flight rock. Bit by bit, as slivers and shards fell, our ascent slowed. Then we stopped. Then we started to go down. By the time the hull of the ship touched down in the forest, there were 6 on board. Maris had given birth." The captain stood up again, pacing agitatedly back and forth. "What to do?" he said. "We was grounded now in the deep woods, and the baby wouldn't survive the journey on foot back to Undertown. Gobtrax ordered us to get rid of the brat, said he wouldn't wait. Maris was hysterical, but Gobtrax's bodyguard, a hulking great cloddertrog, made it clear he'd snap my neck if I objected. What could I do?" The pirates shook their head earnestly, solemnly. Tem poked at the fire. "We left the skyship and set off into the forest. I remember how loud the creatures of the night were, and how still the tiny bundle in Maris's arms. Then we came across the small village of wood trolls." Twig started. The hairs at the back of his neck stood on end. Icy shivers strummed his spine. "Odd creatures," the captain mused. "Stocky, dark, not too bright. Live in tree cabins. I had to tear the child away from Maris. The look in her eyes at that moment is as if it was all the life drained out of her." She never spoke a word again. The captain sniffed. Twig's heart beat faster and faster. "I wrapped the baby up in a shawl," he went on, his voice little more than a whisper. "The birthing shawl that Maris had made for it. Stitched it all herself, she did. With a lullaby tree for luck," she said. "I left the bundle at the foot of a cabin tree, and the pair of us left. We didn't look back once." The captain paused and stared ahead into the shadows of the forest, hands clasped behind his back. Despite the roaring flames, Twig was cold. He had to clamp his jaws firmly shut to still his chattering teeth. "You made the right decision, Captain," said Tem Barkwater quietly. The captain turned. "I made the only decision, Tem," he replied. "It's in the blood. My father was a sky pirate captain, as was his father before. And his father before him. Perhaps..." Twig's head was whirling, buzzing. Thought after thought collided with one another. The abandoned baby, the wood trolls, the scarf, his comfort cloth, still tightly tied around his neck. "My scarf," he thought. He stared at the majestic sky pirate captain. "Could you really be my father?" he wondered. "Does your blood flow through my veins? Will I also command a skyship one day?" Maybe, maybe not. There was something Twig had to know. The baby," he said nervously. The captain spun round and looked at him, actually seeing him, it seemed, for the first time. The eyebrow above his patch raised questioningly. "This is Twig, Captain," said Tem Barkwater. "He found the flight rock and—" "I believe the lad can speak for himself," said the captain. "What did you want to say?" Twig climbed to his feet and looked down at the ground. His breath came short and jerky, and he could barely speak. "Sire," he said, "was the baby a girl or a boy?" Is Twig looking upset? Quintinius Virginus stared back at Twig, his brow deeply furrowed. Perhaps he could not remember. Perhaps he remembered only too well. He stroked his chin. "It was a boy," he said finally. The sound of chains jangled behind him as mug butt rolled over in his sleep. The captain drained his mug and wiped his mouth. "Early start tomorrow," he said. "We could all do with some shut-eye." Twig thought he would never sleep again. His heart was aflutter, his imagination working on overtime. "Hubble, you're on first watch," the captain said. "Wake me at 4. "Whoa," the Banderbear grunted. "And be careful of our treacherous friend here." Twig started with alarm until he realized the captain was referring to Slibo Spleeth. "Here," said Spiker as he handed Twig a blanket. "Take this. I'll be warm enough tonight in my cater nest." And with that, the Oak Elf climbed to the tree, boarded the skyship, and made his way up to the coon at the top of the nest. Twig wrapped the blanket around him and lay on a belt of quilted leaf fall. The fire was burning bright and hot. Glittering sparks and glowing embers rose skywards. Twig stared into the dancing flames. But for the Sky Pirate, this Captain Cloud Wolf, the one who would cause Spelda and Tuntum to send Twig away for fear he would be forced to join his crew. But for him, Twig would have never left the Wood Troll village in the first place. He never would have strayed from the path. He never would have been lost. But now he understood. He had always been lost. Not just when he left the path, but from the very beginning, when the Sky Pirate had left him wrapped in a birthing shawl beneath the Snatchwood cabin. Now he'd been found again. 3 short sentences kept going round and round his head. "I found my path! I found my destiny! I found my father!" Twig closed his eyes. The image of the heart-charming stick pointing upwards sprang into his mind. That was where his future lay. In the sky with his father. And that is the end of Chapter 12. The next episode will be the finale, Chapter 13. Thank you so very much for joining me, and I'll catch you then.